Welcome back. Senator Bernie Sanders is promising he'll return to the campaign trail, despite doctors confirming that he did, in fact, have a heart attack earlier in the week. Sanders left a Las Vegas hospital yesterday, and in a video posted online, he reassured his supporters that he isn't going anywhere.
Hello, everybody. We're in Las Vegas. I just got out of the hospital a few hours ago, and I'm feeling so much better. I just want to thank all of you for the love and warm wishes that you sent to me. See you soon on the campaign trail.
The Sanders campaign says the senator will rest at his home in Vermont for several days, but that he does plan on taking part in the CNN Democratic debate. That's October 15th. And get ready for what could be the make or break moments in the race for 2020. The fourth Democratic presidential debate coming to you live from CNN with the battleground state of Ohio as the backdrop. Watch CNN and the New York Times Democratic presidential debate. It is Tuesday, October 15th, 8 p.m. Eastern, right here on CNN. Hello again, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me this Saturday. I'm Frederica Whitfield. All right, we begin this hour with a barrage of stunning new developments on the impeachment inquiry and a defiant President Donald J. Trump. Democrats, for the first time, have subpoenaed the White House for documents on Ukraine. This coming after President Trump announced that he will not comply with their investigation until House Speaker Nancy Pelosi holds a formal vote on the impeachment inquiry in the House.
We'll be issuing a letter. As everybody knows, we've been treated very unfairly, very different from anybody else.
The House Speaker is pushing back against the president, arguing American democracy is at stake.
Some people say, why are you doing this? He's not worth it to divide the country this way. I said, well, he may not be, but our Constitution is worth it. Our democracy is worth it.
House Democrats are also now demanding that Vice President Mike Pence hand over documents on Ukraine. The Vice President has 10 days to respond. This as the U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo missed his Friday subpoena deadline. Meantime, the New York Times is reporting a second potential whistleblower is considering filing a separate formal complaint. The Times reporting that an intelligence official with more direct knowledge of President Trump's dealings with Ukraine than the original whistleblower whose complaint sparked the impeachment inquiry. And finally, the Washington Post reveals more concerns now coming from the president's aides about his phone calls with other world leaders, which left at least one former White House official, quote, genuinely horrified. The Post reporting in one of the calls, Trump fawned over Vladimir Putin, telling the Russian president he was a great leader. Let's go straight to CNN's Kristen Holmes at the White House. So, Kristen, the president seems to be sending a message, to the world, to America, and particularly to other Republicans by going after Senator Mitt Romney, who called the president's latest invitation to China appalling. And now he is the target of the president's tweets this morning.
That's right, Fred. And I just don't know if going after is strong enough language. It is an all-out character assassination on Twitter, deeply personal attacks. We're going to pull it up so I can show you exactly what I mean. The first line of the first one saying, somebody please wake up Mitt Romney and tell him that my conversation with Ukrainian president was a congenial and very appropriate one. And my statement on China pertained to corruption, not politics. And let's skip to the next one because it gets more personal. Mitt Romney never knew how to win. He is a pompous A who has been fighting me from the beginning, except when he begged me for my endorsement for this Senate run. I gave it to him. And when he begged me to be Secretary of State, I didn't give it to him. He is so bad for ours. A couple things I want to note here. One, we don't know whether or not any of this is true, the begging for Secretary of State or for the endorsement. But on top of that, I want to talk about the strategy here. I have been talking to so many Republicans up on the Hill, so many Republicans within the administration who are really trying to craft messaging and strategy going forward through this impeachment inquiry and through this possible impeachment process if that does happen. This is not part of that. President Trump is sending a clear message by sending out these tweets, as you said, in response to Mitt Romney saying these, talking to China and the Ukraine, asking them for dirt on his political rivals was appalling. He is sending a very clear message. He will go after, he will attempt to discredit and humiliate anyone who goes up against him. Despite all of this messaging from Republicans that we're seeing from every other angle, the president himself, he is being very clear. That is his way of getting through this impeachment process, and anyone who stands up against him is going to face this.
So we're also hearing from the U.S. Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, this morning. He has defied this congressional subpoena, and he's also saying or sending the message that the Trump administration does indeed want to go after corruption.
Yeah, that's right. This was a press conference next to the foreign minister of Greece. I'm going to start with the second part of what you just said there, talking about going after corruption. He did not talk about Biden. He did not even mention the words Joe Biden or Hunter Biden. He really just focused on the part of this that was asking the Ukraine to work with them to look back at the 2016 election and see if there was any election interference, saying that that's totally okay. But again, that is not what is at the center of this impeachment inquiry. What's at the center of this is the fact that President Trump asked foreign leaders to help him dig up dirt on political rivals. So no mention of that at all. But he did address the fact that he had missed that deadline. Take a listen to what he had to say.
State Department sent a letter last night to Congress, which is our initial response to the document request. We'll obviously do all the things we're required to do by law. I was a member of Congress once. Article 1 has a certain set of powers, and Article 2 has an obligation to make sure that we protect officials at the State Department.
And Fred, we're standing by to see what Congress, how they respond to that letter.
All right, Kristen Holmes, thank you so much. And later on, you'll hear from Joe Biden, who also spoke out on this. I'm quoting him now. He says, all this talk of corruption comes from the most corrupt president ever. That from Joe Biden, the target of this back and forth between the president and his Democratic rival. All right, meantime, damning text messages given to Congress are now muddying up Trump's claim that there was no quid pro quo between his administration and Ukraine. CNN's Shimon Prokopets joining me right now. So, Shimon, how significant are these text messages?
I mean, they really give us an inside look at what was going on during this period, the campaign that was underway to help try and influence the Ukrainians to do what the president wanted them to do. By Rudy Giuliani, certainly in meetings, they describe how some of this was going on. And then also one significant piece it raises is that there was a career U.S. diplomat who raised serious concerns that military aid was being held up because of political reasons, because of the political campaign. And that is certainly one of the most significant things that we see in these text messages. And just to go over some of them, there's the ones from Kurt Volker, who was the former special envoy to Ukraine, where he talks about getting the Ukrainian president, trying to convince that he will investigate, get to the bottom of what happened in 2016. He writes about that, and then he says, we will nail down visit to Washington, somehow that if they can convince the Ukrainian president to go along with this, that perhaps there would be this visit to the United States. And then there's, of course, the messages from Volker to Rudy Giuliani. And here we really see Rudy Giuliani, obviously a big player in all of this. He writes to the mayor, I had a good chat with Yernik last night. He was pleased with your phone call, mentioned Z making a statement, that's the Ukrainian president. Can we all get on the phone to make sure I advise Z correctly as to what he should be saying? Want to make sure that we get this done right. And then he responds, thanks. And now this is what I just was talking about, this career diplomat. These are text messages from Bill Taylor. Bill Taylor, who is the acting U.S. ambassador to Ukraine. And he writes to Gordon Sondland. He is the U.S. ambassador to the EU, a political appointee by the president, a friend of his, and also someone who donated to the inauguration. And Bill Taylor writes to Sondland, as I said on the phone, I think it's crazy to withhold security assistance for help with a political campaign. And then some 5 hours later, Sondland responds and says, Bill, I believe you are incorrect about President Trump's intentions. And almost in like this lawyerly like fashion, he writes, the president has been crystal clear, no quid pro quos of any kind. And then he writes that the president is trying to evaluate whether Ukraine is truly going to adopt the transparency and reforms that President Zelensky promised during the campaign. And then he writes that he suggests that they stop going back and forth over text, and that if Taylor has any issues, he should reach out to a couple of folks on the phone if he had any issues. So clearly that, I think, is something that members on the Hill are going to zero in on. Sondland is supposed to appear before members on the Hill in a closed-door deposition on Tuesday, so certainly that is going to be a big day, and it will be interesting to see how Sondland describes all this.
All right, Shimon Prokopets, thank you so much. We'll check back with you. All right, let's talk more about this. I want to bring in Jamie Rubin, the former U.S. Assistant Secretary of State under President Clinton. Jamie, good to see you. So in your view, what are the consequences from the U.S. Secretary of State missing a deadline? And why would he want to miss a deadline?
Well, clearly there is a struggle going to go on between the Trump White House and the officials that work for the president and Congress over documents, over subpoenas, over witnesses, over whether the impeachment process has indeed begun or not. It is unusual when we're dealing with specifics like this. The State Department and the Justice Department, frankly, are supposed to be depoliticized. They're the two agencies, certainly when I was in government, where political matters tended to be avoided. Certainly anything related to campaigns, anything related to, political questions within the United States, an effort was made to depoliticize them.
Yeah, well, you've seen, though, these newly, surfaced text messages where the U.S. ambassador to the EU says, call me. This after a diplomat says, wait a minute, let me get this right. Are you saying it's okay now that we withhold aid for political purposes? I mean, how else does a diplomat handle a situation like this, if not for some documentation or for a request of clarity, especially so that there is some record?
Absolutely. Look, this is an unusual situation to have a White House interfering in the question of politics. I remember when President George Bush Sr. was alleged to have asked for documents from the British government about Bill Clinton at a demonstration. There was a big scandal of that. It turned out not even really to be true. So when it comes to election time, the State Department, more so than any agency, is supposed to, as Madeleine Albright used to say, have their political genes removed from their body. But obviously that didn't happen here. I was struck, frankly, by the degree to which some of the officials that have been foreign policy experts like Kurt Volker and others who were fully participating in what was clearly pressure on the Ukrainian president. Remember, when it comes to Ukraine, there is a long history here where the bureaucracy has been very tough on Russia, helping Ukraine, helping them with equipment, trying to push back against Russia, while the White House has had a different policy from the beginning. And so there's been a struggle between the president's views on Russia and the bureaucracy, and you're seeing that struggle play out in these texts.
So I wonder if you could then tell us what it would be like, what it might be like for Volker or any other career State Department or longtime State Department employee who's being asked to do something that feels uncomfortable, possibly illegal, possibly unconstitutional, but does reluctantly or otherwise carry it out. I mean, what becomes the justification of that? It's just, I want to stay in this game, and I do believe in the work that we're doing, and this too shall pass. Or is it, I'm going to do it as long as I can until I just can't anymore? I mean, what could be the explanation for tolerating or enduring what you feel is uncomfortable?
Well, Frederica, you've really put your finger on the dilemma that an administration official would face here. And if we're all going to be honest with ourselves, we should admit that over the last 2 years, ever since President Trump has run for election, the standards by which government behavior had been expected have changed. Ever since he first asked the Russian government to look into Hillary Clinton's emails, this whole concept has changed, and dozens and dozens of times people have suggested that this behavior was beyond the pale. But the truth is, it's up to the Congress to decide what these matters, whether they entail high crimes and misdemeanors. Beyond that, all these issues are political issues. So if I were to imagine what it was like, here's the best case I can make. An official wants to have Ukraine stand up to Russia, knows that Russia is committing an act of aggression by attacking Ukraine day after day, and they're trying to figure out a way to get the president to be on Ukraine's side, knowing that once the president does that and shows support for Ukraine and sits down with the president and allows military aid to be provided, then Ukraine can feel more safe and secure that Russia will not continue its aggression. So if you believe in the policy of preventing Russia's aggression, I can see you taking it quite far, so long as these political questions are, been out there for years now without any real answers for bureaucrats who are trying to, in many cases, do the right thing. But I think you're right to point out that people will want to get stuff in writing maybe a little bit more, and maybe WhatsApp texts probably aren't the best way to get your instructions when you're dealing with this. And you saw a responsible official, Bill Taylor there, finally said in exasperation, I'd have to quit if the military aid was cut off because of a refusal to do this. So it's going on every day. There's obviously, this is the most stark example, but if we're going to be frank, the standards have changed across the board over the last couple of years.
All right, we value your point of view. Jamie Rubin, thank you so much. Good to see you.
You're welcome.
All right, still ahead, with President Trump facing serious legal questions, he is turning to two of his most trusted supporters, not lawyers, to head up the White House's response. Plus, Ukraine now says they'll take a second look at investigations, some involving the company where Hunter Biden sat on the board. Details coming up. A subpoena was delivered to the White House to Mick Mulvaney, acting chief of staff, calling for documents and communications that are highly delicate around the president's calls with Ukraine. With me now to discuss this is Shan Wu, who is a former federal prosecutor and a CNN legal analyst, and Jeff Mason, a White House correspondent for Reuters. Great to see you both.
Good to see you too, Fred.
All right, so Shan, you first. Lots of congressional subpoenas, some that have gone directly to, requesting the testimony, and then others that talk about documents. And when you have the Secretary of State thus far who has missed the deadline, which was yesterday, to supply material, how will any of these committees compel someone to comply?
They have a few choices. They could go the traditional route, which is to try to get them to comply through contempt and then seek a legal civil lawsuit basically to enforce that contempt. They could kind of go old school, enforce the contempt themselves, use their power, inherent power, to do that. And also, given the direction that the White House seems to be going in with this let's stonewall everything, they could simply add that stonewalling effort to another article of impeachment. Let's remember that Article 3 of the Nixon articles was obstruction of Congress, and they could also do all three. So they do have a number of options available to them.
Because thus far there has been a lot of stonewalling, and if that option has not been taken, if no options from the committees are taken in terms of, contempt, forms of contempt, then they won't be able to get the material that they need, can they? Or are there other avenues to take?
If the White House doesn't produce them voluntarily, then they have to seek some form of compulsion. And ultimately, I think Trump has a slight misunderstanding of the Supreme Court, but he kind of gets the idea that he always wants to rely on them. And I think they're ultimately aiming for a fight over executive privilege and or their newly invented doctrine of immunity. And I think he's going to have a nasty surprise on that front, because there's a big difference when the Supreme Court considers things that are more policy-based versus something like this, which is much more traditional legal analysis about the power of the executive. So I think it's going to be headed there in some way or another.
And Jeff, the president continues to be defiant, saying, yeah, I talked to him. It was a perfect call. Ukraine and China, this is kind of like a Russia, if you're listening, get involved as well. But then the president has spent his time today, going after Democrats, calling them do-nothings, and then even targeting a fellow Republican, Senator Mitt Romney, saying that well, saying lots of terrible things, being very critical of him because Mitt Romney has said this behavior is appalling. So is this the president's defense strategy against impeachment? Just try to get the last word on being insulting? Why is this, and how is this the most effective route?
Yeah, I think it's a terrific question, and I think the answer so far is yes. That doesn't mean it's going to stay that way. I mean, as this impeachment inquiry intensifies, one would think, or one would anticipate, that the White House would also intensify its strategy for dealing with that, both on a legal and a political communications level. But so far, I think the main part of the strategy is exactly what you just said. It's the president's tweets. It's the president expressing his grievances, be it online or be it in person, at press conferences or Q&As with journalists like myself and my colleagues. And it's showing. I mean, that the frustration that he's showing is, very transparent in terms of where he is about this whole thing. But it has also frustrated some of his fellow Republicans who would like to defend him, who would like to have to be part of a more robust defense strategy, and they're not seeing that leadership or that direction anyway so far from his team.
And you experienced it firsthand, to see the frustration from the president this week when you were pressing him on very pertinent questions, and he was trying to deflect by saying, ask the Finnish president something. You got a question for him? And you were like, I do. I have a follow-up, but first I really need you to answer this. So at that moment, did you see in this president a difference in how he is handling himself, as so much seems to be revealed about his interactions with Ukraine?
I think we have seen this president get frustrated before and lash out in anger. He did lash out at me this week, but that's not the first time we've seen him do that to a journalist. So I'm reluctant to say that there's a difference or a shift, but I do think the anger and the frustration was intense, has been intense this week, and we see that with him or in him at times when he feels under pressure, when he feels like he's under the gun, and clearly that's how he's feeling right now with regard to the impeachment inquiry and with regard to the coverage of it and the direction it's moving.
And Shan, how about your thoughts on the White House impeachment team really being run by a political team instead of a legal one? Why? What is the approach here? Is there an advantage to doing so?
I don't think there's any advantage. This team of Mulvaney and Jared is not a team that is going to strike fear in the hearts of anybody. Looking back to the last time a close family member was part of a close inner circle, Bobby Kennedy, Jared is no Bobby Kennedy. I think probably the reason they're turning to this group is that these are perhaps two of the only people that are still in good graces with the president and can at least talk to him about some strategy. But whatever team you put in place, political, communications, as Jeff was talking about, or legal, their biggest problem has always been their client, which is Trump is unable to stay on message. He gets rid of someone whose message he doesn't like. So whatever strategy you come up with, you just can't execute it.
All right, Shan Wu, Jeff Mason, good to see you both. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Fred.
Good to see you, Fred.
All right, still ahead, Democratic presidential candidate Bernie Sanders vowing to get back on the campaign trail following a heart attack. His message to supporters coming up. All right, welcome back. Senator Bernie Sanders is traveling back to Vermont today after doctors confirmed that he had a heart attack earlier this week. The 78-year-old Vermont senator will continue his recovery in Burlington after he was released from a Las Vegas hospital yesterday. Despite the scare, Sanders is reassuring his supporters that he isn't going anywhere. CNN's Ryan Nobles has been following Sanders' campaign. So Ryan, along with the obvious health concerns, how concerned is Sanders' staff about all of this?
Well, Fred, at this point, they are putting on a brave face. They are acting like this does not change the game for them at all, that Bernie Sanders is going to make a full recovery, and as a result, he's going to be back out on the campaign trail very soon. In fact, that's what Sanders told his supporters last night in a video message. Take a listen.
Hello, everybody. We're in Las Vegas. I just got out of the hospital a few hours ago, and I'm feeling so much better. I just want to thank all of you for the love and warm wishes that you sent to me. See you soon on the campaign trail.
And I don't think there's any doubt that Sanders does feel a lot better. This procedure has made his health, has improved his health quite a bit. But there is a political reality here, Fred. This is a 78-year-old man who just suffered a heart attack that will be in the back of voters' minds. But the campaign continues. They're relaunching a $1.3 million ad buy in Iowa on Tuesday. They have surrogates across the country today. They say the campaign moves forward. At this point, though, the only thing he has committed to in the near future is the October 15th CNN New York Times debate. That may be the first time we see Bernie back on the campaign trail. Fred?
All right. So the flip side of this is his financial, health is quite robust, isn't it?
Oh, in a big way, Fred. In fact, we broke last night that his campaign will report $33.7 million cash on hand. That is a massive number, especially coming in to the fourth quarter of 2019 and heading into 2020. There will be no other campaign that comes close to that number. Elizabeth Warren's campaign will report $25.7 million cash on hand. This is the reality for Bernie Sanders. Yes, this health concern is going to make it difficult for him, but he still has a lot of supporters and he has a significant war chest. Fred, the reason candidates get out of presidential races isn't because of their poll numbers. It's because they run out of money. Bernie Sanders is not running out of money anytime soon. So that means he is likely in this race for the long haul.
All right, Ryan Nobles, thank you so much. All right, so with all this swirling around the White House, how do people in Ukraine feel about being wrapped up in an international scandal? And what is the government there doing about it? More right after this. Ukraine says it is going to review its earlier investigations into the owner of an energy company linked to the son of former Vice President Joe Biden. The country's prosecutor said he was reviewing a number of cases opened by his predecessor, Viktor Shokin. Here's what Ukraine's current deputy prosecutor said about Shokin this week.
Can I just ask that Mr. Giuliani's used a lot of evidence coming from Mr. Shokin. Do you think Mr. Shokin is a reliable witness? Reliable witness of allegations against Mr. Biden?
Mr. Shokin, I don't know.
But you worked with him?
Yes.
Did you trust him?
I don't think that he's a reliable person. That's it.
President Trump pressured Ukrainian leader Volodymyr Zelensky to investigate both Bidens during a phone call in July. And that was Sam Kiley who was asking those questions. He's joining me right now from Kiev, Ukraine. So do we know if this decision, this latest decision to review cases targeting the company, not necessarily the Bidens, right? Was this prompted by what's going on here in the United States or by the initial calls from the White House?
Fred, it's very hard to say with any clarity, but certainly the position of the Ukrainian officials, you saw the prosecutor general there, or the deputy prosecutor general, his boss was absolutely adamant that this was part of a much wider investigation into much bigger fish that they have to fry, much wider and more financially damaging to Ukraine than getting involved in the minutiae of whether or not Hunter Biden should or should not have been on the board of a Ukrainian gas company, as Mr. Trump would like to see investigated. But if one looks at the exchange of tweets, particularly between diplomats, American diplomats here in Ukraine and the new Ukrainian administration, you can see the degree of pressure being brought on the government, but also that they wanted specifically 2016, the role of Ukraine in the 2016 elections mentioned, and the Bidens. They got neither. And ultimately, I think really what the Ukrainians have found is a formula that on the surface certainly meets the minimum requirements perhaps asked of the Americans without any kind of national humiliation. They were very keen there, Fred, to stress that this is a country that doesn't cave into political pressure. Remember, it's got a war going on with Russia and Russian-supported rebels in the east. That is their principal focus, Fred.
All right, Sam Kiley in Kiev, thank you so much. All right, with U.S. Congress in fall recess, many lawmakers are meeting with constituents in their home districts and getting an earful on the impeachment inquiry of President Trump. What voters are saying next. Right now, there are just 9 House Democrats who are withholding their support for the impeachment inquiry into President Trump. Well, right now, members of Congress are all on fall break, holding town halls and hearing from their constituents. CNN correspondent Polo Sandoval is in New York this afternoon for us. So, Polo, what kind of reactions are these lawmakers getting?
Hey, Fred, good afternoon. You know, one of those representatives, is Max Rose. He's the Democratic congressman, one of the last ones in New York City that was essentially a holdout when it comes to deciding whether or not to support this impeachment probe. However, a change in his message this week as he essentially added his name to the growing list of Democratic moderates who are supporting Nancy Pelosi's efforts to really find out more about this impeachment inquiry, and he's not alone.
Congresswoman Slotkin, welcome.
It's a change of heart for some moderate Democrats in Congress who at one point refused to go anywhere near the word impeachment.
I have not been supportive of an impeachment inquiry up until now.
Michigan Congresswoman Alyssa Slotkin's announcement this week prompted a not-so-warm response from Trump supporters in her district.
The most powerful man in the world reached out to a foreign leader, and asked him to dig up dirt on an American, on a political.
Impeachment also on the minds of constituents in Congressman Max Rose's district.
How are you doing, too? I'm good.
It's a one red spot in New York City.
We need to emphasize that this is a sad and tragic day for the United States of America.
At a Friday night town hall, the Democratic lawmaker once again took questions about his recent decision to back impeachment.
We are going to push and push and push so we make sure that we are holding this White House to a standard.
Rose's district includes Staten Island's Richmond County. It's the only county in New York City that voted for Donald Trump in 2016. Despite that, there was little evidence of any broad anger at Rose's town halls this week, even among non-Democrats like Roy Russo.
I think that's a political thing that he just almost has to do because he's a freshman congressman. I don't know how he can go otherwise. It's a political party and he has to support it. It doesn't affect my thinking of him or my opinion about the impeachment.
While many of his constituents say impeachment is not a top priority, it is for Democrats like Rose. He has a message for congressional Republicans.
They can show some semblance of political courage and integrity as we seek to get to the bottom of what perceives to be a serious issue of corruption and national security. How you doing?
Now, Rose also told me that he's very confident that this impeachment inquiry will not necessarily distract some of constituents from some of the more local issues, which really dominated most of the conversation last night during that town hall, Fred. But as Rose said it, he is very well aware that there are many who will be upset with this decision, or at least his announcement. But to use his word, he also believes that there will be many who will be elated as well.
And Polo, it's really not just Democrats who are getting an earful, right? I mean, we just saw that Iowa Senator Joni Ernst encountered, a rather heated exchange from a constituent when she was back in her district. Take a look.
All of our allies, he's pushing aside. He's making fun of them on Twitter. He calls them names.
And ma'am,
and then we end up with, we love people from North Korea or we love Russia. But I understand it's a non-answer answer, and I understand. I get it. I know what you're saying. But
I can't speak for him. I'll just say that. I can't speak for him.
I know you can't speak for him, but you can speak for yourself.
And I do. And I have said this time and time again. North Korea, not our friend. Russia, not our friend. I have made that very, very clear, and the president knows where I stand on those issues.
What about whistleblowers?
And I've already said that, too. Whistleblowers should be protected. I stand with Chuck Grassley on this. We have laws in place. Again, laws need to be enforced.
So, Polo, does this just exemplify that there are a lot of constituents who are saying they're feeling emboldened to talk to these elected officials, talk to, their representation, face to face and tell them what they think and feel?
Yeah, I think what we just heard a little while ago, Fred, not just from the Republican from Iowa, but also from the Democrat from New York, is that their constituents are certainly holding them accountable here. For example, when you talk about Max Rose, Representative Rose, he is a Democrat representing a predominantly red district. And then you hear from Joni Ernst a little while ago, she is a Republican senator representing a Republican region, yet both of them are certainly getting heat from their constituents right now.
All right, Polo Sandoval, thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thanks.
We've got so much more straight ahead in the newsroom. But first, meet this week's CNN hero, Robin Carroll.
I started coming out to the community. The lots were all empty. The houses were getting boarded up. people were not coming outside. I stood on the corner and just asked anyone that walked by, are you interested in taking back your community? And everyone said absolutely yes. We are really brave space and courageous space. We're going to get there. We will work through all of what is holding you back to becoming the person and the potential that you have to be.
To learn more about Robin's work, go to cnnheroes.com.
CNN Heroes. Brought to you.
All right, shocking new estimates that taxpayers could be on the hook for tens of millions of dollars to protect Education Secretary Betsy DeVos. According to the U.S. Marshal's Office, DeVos's security detail is expected to rack up more than $26 million in costs over President Trump's first term. Let's bring in Jonathan Wackrow, a former Secret Service agent under President Obama. So, Jonathan, trying to offer protection for the education secretary. I mean, there is a minimum, right? But what explains the extenuating circumstances, or why a Betsy DeVos in this case would have on average more than $7 million in security detail per year?
Well, I think, first of all, Fred, close protection and executive protection needs to follow a threat-based methodology by which threats that are received or directed towards the secretary are assessed fully for the means, opportunity, and intent for somebody or a group to cause physical harm towards that individual. I think right now what I'm failing to see are the threat indicators that would warrant this level of protection. Here's what I mean by this.
Well, would that be public information? Because, I mean, even just according to Washington Post reporting that she became the first education secretary to receive protection from marshals who more typically guard judges and witnesses and catch fugitives. The Marshal Service said, Washington Post quoting, it regularly conducts threat assessments on Ms. DeVos to determine threats to the secrari's safety. So that kind of speaks to what you're about to say.
Well, yeah, it does, Fred. Listen, I hold the U.S. Marshal Service in the utmost respect. However, I think we have to look back at the genesis of when the Marshal Service came into taking over this operation, which was in 2017, when the secretary then encountered some protesters at a middle school. Protesters are not threats. Protesters are individuals who are expressing their First Amendment right to free speech. In this instance, we also have not seen other individuals being arrested for making threats. So I just really question the veracity of the threat environment that is currently being mitigated.
That's why you tweeted out that you think this, or you're hoping this is not vanity protection detail.
Absolutely. If this is a vanity detail, then what it does is it undermines the credibility of not only the protective construct, but the individuals that are executing it.
All right, Jonathan Wackrow, thank you so much.
Thanks a lot, Fred.
All right, tomorrow night, the CNN original series, Declassified, Untold Stories of American Spies, takes a look at a classic Follow the Money investigation. Take a look.
My role in the investigation was as the prosecutor, the assistant U.S. attorney in the...
Again, everyone, thank you so much for joining me. I'm Frederica Whitfield. All right, we begin with a flurry of new developments on the impeachment inquiry into President Trump and his new verbal offensive against his critics. Democrats, for the first time, have subpoenaed the White House for documents on Ukraine. This coming after President Trump announced he will not comply with their investigation until House Speaker Nancy Pelosi holds a formal vote on the impeachment inquiry in the House.
We'll be issuing a letter. As everybody knows, we've been treated very unfairly, very different from anybody else.
The House Speaker is pushing back against the president, arguing American democracy is at stake.
Some people say, why are you doing this? He's not worth it. To divide the country this way. I said, well, he may not be. But our Constitution is worth it. Our democracy is worth it.
House Democrats are also now demanding that Vice President Mike Pence hand over documents on Ukraine. The vice president has 10 days to respond. This as the U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo missed his Friday subpoena deadline. Meantime, the New York Times is reporting a second potential whistleblower is considering filing a separate formal complaint. The Times reporting that an intelligence official with more direct knowledge of President Trump's dealings with Ukraine than the original whistleblower, whose complaint sparked the impeachment inquiry. And new today, President Trump is now going after one of the few Republican critics speaking out against the president on these phone calls and interaction with foreign countries and inviting them to be a part of the U.S. elections. The president has launched a Twitter attack on Senator Mitt Romney after the GOP lawmaker called the president's invitation to China wrong and appalling. CNN's Kristen Holmes is at the White House for us. So, Kristen, Trump seems to be sending a message to fellow Republicans